Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what is the next salvation for Hawaii's economy? Aloha and welcome to Insights. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Modern Hawaii has endured a boom and bust economy. With primary job drivers like tourism, construction, and government spending, we are the victim of forces beyond our control. Terrorist attacks that impact travel, financial crises that reduce investment, and government budget cuts. What is the answer that can stabilize our economy for the future? Is it high tech? Is it film? Is it calling to us from the ocean's depths or from maybe even outer space? What is the next salvation for Hawaii's economy? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Christopher Grandy is an economist at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. He serves on Hawaii's Council on Revenues, which sets economic forecasts to assist the state government in balancing its budget. Vasilios Siromos is the Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. One of his priorities is to support research growth that will double the state's research enterprise to $1 billion a year over the next decade. And Jay Fidel is a Honolulu business lawyer and the founder of Think Tech Hawaii, a nonprofit that raises awareness about technology, energy, diversification, and globalization through a variety of media and events. Economist Paul Brubaker was scheduled to appear in tonight's show, but he's running a little late and we're holding a seat for him. Let me start off with Chris. Chris Grandy. We're hearing good numbers about the economy. Unemployment is low compared to the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. We do seem to have growth, although it's stagnated somewhat. But is this the economy we really want to have for Hawaii right now?
Well, I think an economy that's growing is better than one that's not. In the short run, yes. Actually, over the last year and a half, the economy was growing surprisingly rapidly, at least from my perspective, sitting on the Council on Revenues. A year ago, we were quite happy about the way things were going. Things have frankly cooled recently, and that's been reflected in the Council on Revenues forecasts as well. I think that, looking ahead, we're probably going to be doing okay. I expect the U.S. economy as a whole to pick up growth in the next 6 months, 12 months. But as you pointed out, there's a fair amount of uncertainty, not only for Hawaii, but for the whole globe.
Vasily, on that same point, though, is it growth the sole way we should judge our economy, or do we have the kind of diversity? We talked a little bit about boom and bust. We talked about the limited number of industries. Are we diverse enough?
That's a very personal opinion, and clearly, in my opinion, we're not diverse enough at this point. And what we're trying to do, and Jay can jump into that, he's been in the business for a long time with the high-tech sector. We're trying to level out all the peaks and valleys within the economy, diversify the economy, and try to make the downs a little bit smaller and the highs not as high, although we would love to have a lot of highs. And we're trying to actually add in the economy quality jobs, high-tech jobs or quality jobs or high-paying jobs. You have a very well-educated workforce. So I think it is good for us, it is good for the economy, it is good for everybody in the state.
Jay, on that point, is tech really, I know that you're a big proponent of tech industries, but when you talk about tourism being this big and the government spending being this big, where is tech in there, and really what would it take to actually get that so it's evening out those boom and bust process?
Can I answer your previous question first?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is this the economy we want to have? Answer no. This economy is hollowing us out, spiritually, in terms of quality of life. When's the last time your friends went down to Waikiki? If we're going to do the Council of Revenues, we should measure a lot more metrics. We should measure how many homeless are outside the window. We should remember, we should measure how often people go to Waikiki, and they don't. We should measure all those sort of psychic things that are happening. We could have a great economy off tourism, the engine of our economy, as people say, but that doesn't affect the average working man.
Well, let me point out. Oh, go ahead and finish. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Well, Chris, just in Chris's defense, the Council of Revenue's job is to gauge how much tax revenue is coming in. But on that question, I mean, is there anybody who's asking, is this a high quality environment in terms of the quality of life? It's sort of like the happiness formula or whatever that we've heard of.
Well, this is a deep question, I think, and one that is debated, I think, across the social sciences. Economists for a long time have toyed with the idea of talking about standards of living, and sometimes that's been equated to rates of GDP growth or per capita GDP. But I think most economists recognize that those are, Jay is quite right, insufficient measures. What people care about, including economists, is a variety of things: the quality of the environment, schooling, intellectual opportunities, arts, and so on. So that's a huge question. I think, nevertheless, though, it's much harder to address some of those broader concerns if you're in an economic environment in which jobs are stagnating, in which economic growth is traditionally measured as stagnating. We can begin to afford to pay attention to those things if the basic underlying economy is doing well. It's much harder to do so if that's not the case.
Vasilis, let me ask this also. Whose job is it to make the economy change? You're at the university, obviously. I think that there's a thinking that education is the key, but really, whose job is this? Is it the government's job?
I think it's everybody's job. The university clearly has a role to play. The private industry has a role to play. The government has a role to play. What the university can do is can educate well-trained individuals, create opportunities, but we cannot create the jobs here for these individuals. A lot of our talent, even graduates from the university, they have to leave the islands, and they have to go, most of our students in that high-tech industry go to the West Coast, so there is a lot of brain drain, and we have to stop that. We have to invest here, and actually it's a big difference. I came here 23 years ago, and 23 years ago, high-tech, intellectual property, venture capital, entrepreneurship were words that they were not even spoken. Very few people were speaking those words, and Jay probably was one of the very few. But we're 23 years later, and you see not only the government, you see the university, you see the private industry, even the Hawaii Business Roundtable, which is this traditional banking industry, to take or to pay attention more into high technology, information technology, cybersecurity, ocean sciences, all the high-tech areas of growth here for the island. So I think it's everybody's responsibility, not the university's, everybody's.
To answer your question of before, is tech the holy grail? Is tech the salvation? The next salvation, by the way, assumes there was a salvation before.
Well,
and salvation assumes that
salvation,
there's something you need to save. I'm not sure. We are at a crossroads. Now the word salvation is right. In terms of the, when this conversation began, and I think in large part we all have a kind of sense of amnesia. We are suffering amnesia. John Burns talked about this early on in statehood. George Ariyoshi carried it, and he created High Tech Development Corporation, Manoa Innovation Center, and lots of other structures that were intended to bring tech into the economy. And he saw, rightly, that it was an important thing to do. So the conversation we're having now is a conversation that, it's like an echo of something that was talked about a long time ago, and frankly, Daryl, it hasn't had traction in all these years. So if you ask now whether it's the salvation, and I've been looking at it, it's not, because it can't be. Because somewhere along the line, you know, the people who can create an industry, who can change the way the economic ship is pointed, it's not the council, it's not, I don't think it's the governor these days, actually. I think it's more like the legislature. They have the power of the purse to create incentives that will change the way people spend their time, get into business, spend their lives, do research, and they don't get it. This year, there were like 4 bills that were intended to advance technology in the state. One of them had to do with the Manoa Innovation Center, but there were also funding bills and grant bills. There was the resurrection of something called HTIC, Hawaii Technology Innovation Corporation. None of them passed. All of them dropped. They were not all money bills either. A number of them were not. So what I'm only saying is that the leaders that Silas was talking about is the legislature. Until the legislature does something, tech is not a good candidate.
Chris?
Well, frankly, Jay and I have different points of view on this.
Good.
And I think, you know, I don't want to see the legislature, you know, throwing a pair of dice and trying to choose what the next winning industry is going to be. Certainly not the next winning firms. I wouldn't want to see that. I think we have tried that in the past, and it hasn't turned out well. You know, I did a book about 15 years ago called Hawaii Becalmed. It was about the period in the 90s where we had stagnation. And I was at DBED for a good while at that time. And I came out of that wonderful experience, actually, being there and getting to see some things, being convinced that really we need to exercise some humility, we being people who are engaged in public service work, especially if we're engaged in economic development. I don't think we can choose the winners. I think that what really the legislature needs to do is to get things, to the extent it can, structured correctly so that any firm, any industry can potentially be in Hawaii, and if the underlying economics is right, will succeed. And those firms that aren't able to do well in Hawaii perhaps should not be in Hawaii. I just think it's a losing game to try to seriously answer your question, what's the next salvation? That's not something the legislature should do.
Let me jump in on this because I'm somewhere in between Jay and Chris, I think. I think it's very different right now, and you'll see the activity out there. The legislature does have a role to play, but it's not only the legislature, and it can't be only the legislature. We see programs that they funded previously that they're doing extremely well. You see accelerators that you never saw 30 years ago. You see Blue Startups, which is a public-private accelerator. You have Hank Rogers from the Blue Foundation.
Let me stop you just long. Explain what an accelerator is. This is not, I mean, I'm sure this audience is more sophisticated than I am, but I've never quite got that. What is that?
A technology accelerator is a seed funding fund that people come into the accelerator, they come with ideas, they come with proposals, they come with a business plan. There is a process to pick the winners, and it's not the government that picks the winners. These probably are people that they've been out there in the venture capital world, they've been in the banking industry, they've been in technology. They pick certain projects, they put some funds to prove the concept of the idea. They put some business process around those projects and try to create businesses out of those projects. Now, how many of those are going to succeed? Clearly not too many, but it is a numbers game. The more we have, the better the chance is to succeed. And it is, I gotta disagree with Jay. The legislature gave money to DBED through the Hawaii Strategic Development Corporation, through their Hawaii growth, and they have invested in a lot of these accelerators and proof of concepts, and they do correctly require the private sector to go 50-50 with them. So I think there is some good things that they've been done right now.
Well, the problem is we're talking about something that's the salvation of the state. It can't be penny ante. It's got to be major. It's got to be companies making hundreds of millions. I mean, David Wadamo, originally with Hawaii Biotech, said that if he could come up with a drug that would be a drug of value on the global scene, it would eclipse tourism in a minute. The amount of money that would come into the state from holding a patent on a drug like that. We are nowhere near there, and we've been talking about it for a long time. There have been some few successful companies, and there are some startups now, and that's nice, but that's not a salvation to the state's economy. We need something much more robust than this kind of limp effort that we've been having for how many years already. We talk more than we do. You know?
Let me ask this question. This is for all three of you, and I'll start with Chris. Is it in Hawaii that there are? You talk about how government maybe shouldn't be picking favorites, and I take that to mean, for example, there was quite a generous tech tax credit for a while. Is that what you mean by picking favorites? That is, you shouldn't say, okay, here's the industry we want, therefore we're going to change our tax policy to get them going. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes.
And then the second question on top of that is, okay, how about the other side? Well, get government out of the way. That tends to be the second argument about government's role. Do you think that there are ways that the government is in the way of our economy truly diversifying? And we talked earlier, perhaps the Jones Act, tax policy, the benefits that we pay workers, that sort of thing. Are there things that do discourage business from coming to Hawaii?
There may be. I am not an anti-government person, so my caution about the legislature trying to choose winners, whether that's industries or firms, doesn't extend to starving government. I think there's critical roles that government plays, and especially in Hawaii, where the environment is so important to not only to the people who live here, but to the economy. Mm-hmm. There's a host of things that government appropriately should be doing. I think, though, that the real world is one that evolves and changes. And so we may have regulations in place that over time become less appropriate to the situations that they were designed for. And so it makes absolute sense to me to have people looking at those and suggesting revisions. Sometimes the regulations simply should be repealed. At other times they should be tweaked or adjusted for current situations. There may be things I'm not a fan of the Jones Act. I actually think, talk about things have changed. I think the Jones Act was passed in 1898. Maybe time to take a more serious look at trying to do something about that. But that's not going to be the salvation of the economy. We're talking about small order of things here.
Let me interrupt you for a second because I think it's important that we define some terms. The Jones Act is the law that essentially requires American flagged carriers, ships, to transport goods between American ports and other American ports, right?
Yes.
Sometimes I get lost on the international side, but the argument being that it contributes to our cost of living. Same thing with other, HECO contributes to our cost of living. Our energy policy contributes to our cost of living. Are those big feature things? Vasily, let me ask you that. Are those the things that are making Hawaii too hard to do business? The cost of living, the expense of shipping, and all those sort of things?
All of the above, right? The cost of living, education. I don't want to say you're 2,500 miles away from the mainland because these days this is not an issue. But critical mass is an issue. We want to aspire to be like the metropolitan Seattle area with respect to the tech area. We want to be like the San Diego area. And we aspire to be that. We want to be that. Now, we're going to also have to understand that you need critical mass in certain problems. We are a community of 1 million people. These communities are more than 1 million people. So we're lacking critical mass. We have high cost of living. We have high cost of energy. So these are barriers. So we have to look at industries like information technology, cybersecurity. We have to look at different type of industries. Is the tech the salvation? I don't think that tech is the salvation. It helps, clearly helps to diversify the economy. Yes, we can think big, we can think bold, but we have to be realistic on the other side too.
I'd like to just, something you said, I mean, triggers this whole thing about we're sending money offshore. Hawaii, an island state, and I believe the economics for an island state are different in many ways, and has to be treated differently. But here we are sending out money for fuel, $6-7 billion. If I gave you $6-7 billion, that would amount to a salvation, wouldn't it? And if I gave you, $12-13 billion that we send out for 90% of our food, that would also be a salvation. So if you're looking for sort of the nano approach, the nega approach, if you will, in other words, turn it on its side and get that money back here, we would have a very different economy, and we would have salvation from those things because there's so much money involved. That means to establish a way of relying only on local fuel with local owners, not necessarily owners offshore where the profits go offshore. Local owners, local fuel, and secondly, local food, local owners. Now that would be a real boost to our economy and would make us much more resilient. That's the self-sufficiency people talk about.
I think that's a horrible idea.
We haven't agreed on anything yet. So.
Right. It's nice sitting next to you, though. I really think that flies in the face of long-standing standard economic theory. I mean, what we teach at our undergraduates at Manoa. No, the reason that Hawaii is as wealthy as it is, has as high incomes as it does, is precisely because we're an open economy, precisely because we haven't given in to the impulse, the fear that is represented by self-sufficiency. You know, you talk about saving on the money that we send out for energy and food, but look at that's the import side. Think about the export side. We shut down the open economy here. We will have a much smaller economy. It may be able to support, I don't know, maybe 200,000 people, but most of the people living here now couldn't survive.
Well, why do you say that it would shut anything down? I mean, if we, for example, use renewable fuels, and we're moving in this direction anyway, that's not shutting anything down. If we provided our own food, and I would like to talk at this table about that,
well, that
likewise is not shutting anything down. It's giving us another option.
First, let me go to our moderate on the right here. So this debate, where do you sit on this?
Actually, I don't think that I will have to agree. Sorry, Jay, I will have to agree with Chris on that. It is an open economy. It is a global market. It is a global competition. It is great to produce more of our fuel. Great to produce more of our food, but we cannot. I doubt that we're going to be 100% reliant in our own resources. It is a novel goal. Whether it is implementable in the near future, I doubt that. You have to be pragmatic at some point.
Let me ask this question. This is a viewer question that's on this point. David from Kaneohe writes, as an island state, we should be at the forefront in leading the nation in such things as recycling, alternative energy, and aquaculture. Why are we not? Great question, and kind of on this point, and perhaps, you know, like for example, we have an agricultural economy now that makes a lot of money off of innovating in seeds. Hope the GMO people can call me now and ask this question, but that's one of the ways we're leading the nation in something, but it's very controversial because it's taking away from our self-sufficiency because we're giving farmland over to essentially an industrial research project. So, but as to this question, nuts and bolts, how do we turn things like leading and recycling, alternative energy, and aquaculture, how do we turn that into jobs that are meaningful, high-paid jobs in this state?
Let me pick with that one. I'll pick alternative energy because I think the university is very good at alternative energy. And there is an institution within Manoa, it's called the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, that has been here, I think, from Governor Ariosi's years. So back in the 70s, and with the oil crisis, that institute was formed. They've been in the business of alternative energy the last 40 plus years, so they didn't start to do that yesterday. So with respect to alternative energy, I think as a state, we are up in the forefront. We're very good in smart grid technology. We're good in fuel cells, biofuels. So I want to assure everybody that the university is in a very good position now. How this translates to jobs, in 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a new clean tech sector of jobs. So the question is how fast and how well the university can adapt to train and educate students that will be able to fill these jobs. So to me, that is my concern and we'll try to address.
Everybody always talks about jobs, but if I gave you $6 billion and put it into the economy, that means that I wouldn't have to pay $300, $400 for my electric bill. I would have more disposable income and I'd be a better consumer. I would consume more. So, I mean, I don't think you need to test it only by jobs. And I don't think actually renewable energy involves all that many jobs. But to me, if you put that money in the economy, you have a bit of a salvation.
Chris, let me ask this question though. I mean, we see this as a political debate. One group defining the strength of the economy based on the jobs it's generating, the jobs it's producing, the pay people are earning. And you mentioned high pay and wealth. And what struck me was, I think a lot of people in Hawaii don't feel like we are particularly highly paid compared to the folks on the mainland. In fact, people might argue that's why we have a brain drain. I don't think you're saying, though, that we should be satisfied with that. So I'm just asking, is how do, again, these many facets of potential, how do we translate that into jobs? You started to keep pushing on it, but I think the average person wants to know, am I going to have more opportunity?
Well, I don't really have an answer to that. My perspective is that the way those are translated into jobs, the way that's translated into incomes is to try to make it possible for companies who are going to take advantage of the new energy technologies. Perhaps there is a viable industry in agriculture that can be significant, or aquaculture. The viewer asked about aquaculture. Those are things that are determined by people who are running companies, who are managers of companies. I don't have a particular expertise in that.
Let me interrupt you. When you were at DBED, you probably had companies, people investigating the state as a place to do business. Did you have times when people said, well, oh, thanks, but no thanks because of X factor when it comes to Hawaii?
Sure, we did. But there's always a conundrum there, right? Because people come to the state, some of them are looking for real opportunity. So what is there a comparative advantage that Hawaii can present here? Climate, environment, all of those things are real advantages to us. And frankly, we've built an economy around that, given our current understanding of technology, given our labor force, and so on. But there are also companies that come to the state and say, well, what can I get out of the ledge? I can promise you several thousand jobs, and so give me 75% tax credit or more, that's where I get nervous. I would like the state's public policy to be relatively neutral, appropriately tailored for Hawaii, protecting the environment where appropriate, paying attention to public education, the basics, and then let the companies identify what the next salvation is.
Well, I think that kind of laissez-faire, if God wanted us to be a tech state, he would have made us a tech state. I don't buy that.
Let me stop you for a second, though, Jay.
I do have an answer to the question, though.
The question about Which question?
How you create the jobs out of these possibilities.
Okay, go ahead.
Agriculture. Okay, we had a program only last week, and I myself was pretty surprised to find that aquaponics, this is through your CTAR unit,
Yes, which
is going great guns. You know, we tried and failed at building diversified agriculture after the plantations failed in the 60s and 70s. They all closed down. And so we tried in a very limp way, I think, to create diversified agriculture. That has not happened. But there is a young generation of kids, millennials, who are into entrepreneurship. They're into food. Know the food trucks and Eat the Street, that kind of program. And these kids are a new and vital force in the economic scene. Okay, and what they could do, and some of them already are doing it, is start aquaponics businesses. With aquaponics, you don't need a lot of land, so take that problem out of the equation. And you can, with very little external influence, like for example, you buy some feed, not a lot of feed, it's not that expensive. You create protein, you create produce, you can feed yourself easily. A lot of people are doing that now through CTAR's efforts in the extension program. But the idea is to make this statewide. It's high tech, it is tech. It's a special kind of tech. It's a tech that's perfect for Hawaii. We have the climate, we have the people, we have this generation. We know the technology better than most places, and we could do this, and everyone could be engaged. Right now, it's on the brink of coming somewhere.
Okay, I have to interrupt everyone for a moment. First, I want to apologize to our viewers. Paul Brubaker is not able to join us tonight, so that's why you're seeing an empty seat here. Tonight we're asking, what is the next salvation for Hawaii's economy? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. Now, I'd like to move into, I've got a lot of viewer questions here. I apologize, I know Chris wanted to weigh in on that. But let me very quickly go through some of these because there are a lot of questions and we really want to respect our viewers. We do appreciate them calling in. This is kind of a big one. We'll get there in a minute. It's about education, intellectual horsepower, island state, renewables, renewable energy. Let me ask that again about the how do you turn renewable energy? We talked about the think tech stuff, you know, the big tech stuff. I remember years ago, I was working for a U.S. senator, and he was a big proponent of OTEC. And it was the next salvation for Hawaii's economy. And let me give you a chance, Chris, to talk about, you know, even in a laissez-faire environment, although I don't think you're quite arguing completely laissez-faire.
Thank you, I'm not. I don't think I am.
Yeah, but in an environment where you're relying on market forces, really, to make these decisions for us versus us trying to figure it out, how does it translate into good things happening as opposed to, gee, whatever the winds of the economy makes happen?
Well, you know, I think it's been doing that for generations. I mean, we do live in a market economy. It's not solely a market economy. There's a mixture of institutions that have effects here. But I think that, at least I would argue, that our economic history, not only the United States as a whole, but in Hawaii, has been largely market-based. That's how there is a set of decisions we leave to that institution, that particular social institution, and when that's doing a good job, I think we ought to continue doing that. It's possible that there are circumstances in which the market fails. And then we need to either respond to that if we haven't anticipated it, to respond to it. But the market is a tool. It's quite possible that the market will lead us astray. And then our task is to figure out, well, is there anything that can be salvaged here? Is there anything still useful to us as a society? Frankly, I think the market does a lot of things that are good, and it really does answer the question, how do these different areas generate jobs? Because those jobs will stick around and be here if, in fact, the underlying economics is solid there. But if the underlying economics is really propped up by excessive subsidies or excessive tax breaks, then when those go away, those jobs are out of here.
Okay, let's have some fun now. The one caller calls in, it seems that the panelists are only looking at this through a corporate model. What about government assistance to encourage more agricultural development to feed ourselves? And then another one says, I think the next big industry will be growing marijuana. Tim from Kahului, Maui, I congratulate him on perhaps his
Can
own
I answer that?
Well, I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an industry that is essentially non-existence because of the law, the medical marijuana industry. There's a lot of entrepreneurs, as we know about. But let's just have fun with this idea. What if we just said, hey, we know we grow marijuana really well here. Why don't we just let it go?
It's perfect. It's perfect. And the first question you read too. I mean, I don't see myself in the characterization of not looking at this. I do look at it. I look at agriculture. I see agriculture as technology. I see the university as a critical, central part in that. I also see incentives that the legislature could provide to encourage. Somebody has to say, follow me, boys, I'll lead the way. That's how biotech was established in San Diego. It did not happen by act of God. Now to the point about marijuana, this year there was a bill in the legislature that was introduced by Senator Kalani English to legalize marijuana in Hawaii. It failed, but I saw him last night, and he said he was going to introduce it again. And I think there's a certain amount of popular support for that. Now, that's not the only crop, but it is a crop that could be exported, assuming federal law would allow that. It is a crop that would be, like any food product, it would be valuable. It is already valuable on the gray market or the dark black market, whatever. And I think it could be a piece of our, assume for a moment that a lot of states and ultimately the federal government permit, legalization of marijuana. It would be a great crop for us.
But it's an export.
Yes, it would be.
So it's not exactly self-sufficient.
If you have enough of it, if it's good quality. I mean, can you see the brand, a Hawaii brand marijuana? It would be popular everywhere. Maui, what do they call it? Maui gold? Or
it's always sugar, right? But Vesa, let me ask you, when we talk about diversification towards agriculture, you're a person who wants people to have jobs that pay quite a lot.
Yes.
Is there really hope in agriculture in jobs that are going to be middle-class jobs, or is that going to be basically an immigrant-supported type of industry, do you think? Or is there something we should look for?
I think agriculture has changed, and this is one thing that I'm going to agree with Jay.
I agree with
It's the only one? We've got a whole half an hour.
It is, agriculture right now is a very different industry. It's not the old way of doing business. You see a young generation that is active, is entrepreneurial, uses aquaponics, uses new technologies, new ideas. It's not the same agriculture, and it is good for the state of Hawaii because the state of Hawaii is not going to succeed in mass agriculture. It's going to succeed in niche areas of agriculture. And I'm very happy that you see the young generation of the kids engaged because these are very well-paying jobs. They do agriculture from a different point of view, and agriculture is a good example
I
for
agree
our state.
absolutely with everything Vesely has said. It's white-collar technology is what it is. You don't have to dig in the soil. You don't have to get your hands dirty.
Though even that is fun.
Even though that is fun. But what's going to happen? I mean, if we can get this ball rolling, and maybe tonight somebody listening to the show could make a decision about this, we would change the economy. I do think it would be a salvation. If we could get it rolling on a large scale, because it is possible, we have the resources, we have the generation, we have the technology.
Chris,
If agriculture and aquaponics proceeds on the way that Jay and Vasilis have suggested, I agree too. Here's something that we can agree on. But I would caution that I'd like to see it in precisely the way that Jay and Vasilis have suggested, that it's driven by entrepreneurs, it's driven by young people. It may be possible that there may need to be some temporary help from the legislature in spots, but it should be temporary, it should be sunsetted, and it should be constructed in a way that it does disappear after a while. The problem with these economic development public policies is that they're addictive to the companies that are participating in it. And pretty soon it's very hard to tell whether the company after 20 years is doing well because it's basically sound, or whether it's basically got the stream of income coming in from the legislature. And that's just a waste of resources if that's what we're doing.
I will agree that you don't want to make an incentive forever, but you do want to time it carefully. It's got to be carefully timed. It's got to be prompt response kind of timing. Now would be a real good time.
This is by the government?
Yeah, by the legislature. I mean,
kinda good
and I
luck.
think we're sniffing around the outsides of the 221 debate,
Right.
which we may have before the show is over.
No, we're not.
We've been there.
I can tell you how we're going to argue that one.
Yeah.
221 was the tax breaks we were talking about, tax credits.
Right,
for
technology.
Point is, it wouldn't take that much, in my opinion. You probably agree that all we'd have to do is say, "Follow me, boys. The government approves this. The government wants you to do this. We give you blessing." And some modest, even a modest incentive, maybe some tax credit or tax deduction, something to say you get some benefit if you do this, could unleash thousands of kids in this generation to do what is a very attractive kind of lifestyle.
Let me ask this panel, though. I'm trying to keep this moving because I'm getting a lot of questions and I need to manage this on behalf of the viewers. And I appreciate you guys letting me interrupt you. But this is kind of goes to the whole question about the tourism industry, the state of the tourism industry, how big a piece it is in our economy. We talk about whether the agriculture produces good jobs. Does tourism produce good jobs? That answer is, I think the jury's out on that. But here's the question that prompted that is, would legalized gambling be the salvation of Hawaii's economy? Is that just sort of putting tourism on steroids? What do you folks think? Legalized gambling, Vasily?
That's beyond my pay grade, so I will leave that up to Chris.
but about finding ways to juice up tourism, make more people come, make them spend more when they get here.
Personally, I don't think, and that's my personal opinion, I don't think that legalizing gambling is the answer to increase tourism. As I said, this is a very small place. It's an island community. There are much better ways to make tourism much more attractive, and whether it's agro-tourism, whether there is historical tourism, there are so many things that this place offers.
Talk about the main engine, tourism. I think we have a long way to go before we perfect that. There's a lot of things we're missing. In the 21st century, we could generate all kinds of tourist attractions and accessory uses that would be very valuable to make it more profitable, more satisfying, and more long-term to people who might otherwise go to a competing destination. On the other hand, I absolutely agree with your point about, let's see, what was your point?
Gambling.
Gambling. Because I think that, just look at Boardwalk Empire, one of my favorite shows, and you see what happens to a community. And island communities are even more fragile than a mainland community. And this would have huge social implications. You can argue it on a qualitative basis, but I think that probably at the end of the day, it would wreck a lot of families. It would cheapen life in these islands, and it would be a terrible way to raise a few bucks.
I actually wonder how much of a boost it would be, because the reality is, for many of the visitors coming to Hawaii, they're coming from a place that has legalized gambling, right? I mean, legalized gambling is all over.
It's everywhere.
So you're not going to get.
Then let me shift the question, Chris, to you on about tourism, because one of the things that's happened in Hawaii that a lot of people lament is that there's been so much money flowing naturally into tourism, so much investment, speculation, construction built around tourism, and that is sort of the nature of the natural economy. Do you think the tourist industry could get too big? And then what do you do about that if it becomes so that it's displacing everything else in the economy?
Well, I think that is possible for tourism to get too big. It's possible and I don't want to pick on tourism, it can be any industry can get too big for the size of the economy. And then you really are concerned about diversification and things like that. I think, though, that typically that happens in places where the fences are up, the walls are up around the community, the society, saying, we don't want competitors in here. We don't want to see other industries in here. And frankly, Hawaii hasn't been saying that. Hawaii's been saying, come here, do business here. We would like to have companies and decent businesses come here. And we don't require you to be in tourism, and we'd love you to come and be alternative energy providers or in agriculture or whatever. I'm all for that. The more that we can be open, I think the more likely, playing on the numbers argument that you argued earlier, the more likely that we are going to be successful or continue to be successful.
Open is a problem because, I mean, if you look at the current situation, what you have is every time you start an effort, you have investment money flowing in from somewhere else, but you don't have really any significant local investment money because people put their money on the mainland. So it's like everybody seems to agree, that you invest somewhere else. I mean, even the large trusts in our state do not invest in Hawaii; they invest elsewhere. And so, at the end of the day, whatever industry you want to start, you got to have investment funds. And we don't have local investment funds. So if you look at energy, all the big energy players are from outside. And if they make a buck, the buck goes outside. The same thing, and I worry about this in agriculture too. We've got to find a way to encourage local people to invest locally. It's okay to have investors from outside, but we should also invest locally.
Vasilis said something early when you were talking about the brain drain, and I think it connects to what you're saying about local investment, Jay. I think that especially with today's technology, we need to start thinking of Hawaii as not just Hawaii's economy and what can we do for it. We are connected to a larger economy. In some dimensions, we're connected to California and the West Coast. Other dimensions were connected to Asia and Southeast Asia. I frankly don't worry that much about the brain drain. Frankly, in my personal life, I came to Hawaii. My wife was born and raised here. She lived on the mainland for many years and came back to Hawaii as a professional. My son went to school on the mainland and is back in Hawaii. I think we need to think about the cycle. I think it's great that kids go somewhere else and get a different experience, get new ideas. Some of those people are going to come back to Hawaii because they love the place, they've got ties here, and they're going to bring fresh ideas here. Let's not get caught up in this insular thinking of it's just us against the world.
Let me bring up that brings up an interesting question. We got someone asking about space, which could be another industry we could explore. I like that, space explorer. But we've got Pierre Omidyar, the eBay founder. We've got Larry Ellison of Oracle, who have basically decided they want to come here and make a place. Do you think that that's a factor that we might see, just having such a wonderful place to live, that by the nature of human beings as well as the nature of economy will attract great thinkers, innovators to Hawaii who will then try and help us out? What do you think about it?
The answer to this is absolutely yes. Now, there are a lot of very successful venture capitalists or technologists that not only they're here in Honolulu or in Lanai, you fly into Kona over Christmas and you start counting the private jets on the runway. So there are a lot of smart people, a lot of successful people that they have made Hawaii their home or their second home, and a lot of them actually are involved, at least with the university, in trying to help with their local community, with the venture capital community. But every time, I will agree with Chris, I'll go back to his comment, the competition is global, it's not local. The economy is global. So all these venture funds, all these people are going to put their money where there is merit. And we have to have merit in order to compete. So
exactly.
How we get to that meritorious place, yes, we can get as much help from these people, but nobody's going to put money on some deal because it is from Hawaii. They're going to put money because it is in Hawaii, and it is a great deal to put money.
The problem is if you have outside investment coming in, outside owners, then the profit that is earned goes outside. We should have the profit too, not only outside. And I'd like to add also to the point, Vasily, that in the 2000s, you know, the 10 years mostly of the Lingle administration, aside from 221, which we'll put aside, there was very little capital coming in order to support those tech industries, those tech companies. And the tech industry essentially failed for the lack of investment in that period. So we absolutely need investment. We take it from wherever we can get it, but wouldn't it be a good idea for us to earn the return on the investment instead of having it earned by someone else, especially when we have the money?
Okay, on the themes of investment and competitiveness, okay, a number of questions about education, the education system, stacked up here. Richard, via Twitter, part of the next salvation, training youth and counting on K-12 schools and universities. Does the panel think our legislature has the, oh, I read this wrong, sorry. Does the panel think our legislature has the intellectual horsepower to promote our economy? Let me change that to just, does the state have the intellectual horsepower? Are we investing in our intellectual horsepower, our educational system, our higher educational system? How does public education balance with the future of Hawaii's economy? I'd like to ask, do you folks feel that we as a society in Hawaii are investing enough in our education system to be the competitive place we need to be? Chris?
Well, I haven't looked in detail at the size of the numbers, so I'm speaking a little bit from just general impressions. My sense is that we spend a lot on education. I don't know how wisely all of those dollars flow. My sense, again, is that there's been particular attention paid in the last few years to improving those sorts of decisions. You know, before the show, we were watching a terrific video by young kids, produced by
high school videographers. Yeah.
High school videographers. That looked pretty good to me. But you know, education is one of those fundamental things that we do have to pay attention to. The question of is it enough? I don't have a particular expertise in that. I'll invite others to.
You know, you folks are both involved in the university. The kids coming in to our university, do they come in ready to be in the university and ready to move into the economy when you're finished with them?
Let me take that one. The good thing about Hawaii and the University of Hawaii, it is a system function. We have 7 community colleges, 2 baccalaureate campuses, West Oahu, Hilo, and Manoa, which is our research one, the flagship campus. So the first thing is access. If a kid coming out of a high school and cannot go through the curriculum or the classes at Manoa, can go through the community colleges, pick up STEAM, and then transfer to Manoa. Articulation is there. The university has done a wonderful job with respect to that. Whether we can do better, we can always do better. Does the legislature need to put more money in education? That's a debatable question. You can answer that both ways, and I'm not an expert K through 12, but within university systems, it is the national trend, education, general funds from the legislature to higher education going down. I don't think this is going to turn around. I don't think we're going to get more money. We just need to find new ways to do our job.
I have 3 points to make on that.
Can you make it in 30 seconds?
Sure. One is I think the legislature ought to give you plenty more money to fix yourself up. It's about time they give you enough money to fund. But you have to be more efficient. The same thing with DOE. It has to be more efficient. And finally, we haven't talked about the high schools. That's part of the generation that I have observed. I have interviewed a lot of them. I've participated in the science fair. There's something happening, Daryl, in the high schools in the science fair. And unfortunately, the legislature pulled the funds from the science fair, and they have to go find other money, and they've had trouble about that. What we need to do is fund those kinds of activities where these bright lights show up.
Okay, let me- I'm
and
gonna
bring
s-
them together.
Thank you, very good. And then real quick, we've got about a minute and a half, which means about 20 seconds each. I know the math doesn't work quite that way, but 2 questions. You can choose which one you want to answer. If you had $100,000 to invest in an industry, what would you choose? Or number 2, if you were a college student heading into college, where would you go and what would you study? I'll start with you, Chris. You could choose one of those questions.
Okay, well, I'll choose the second. If I were coming out of high school and going into college, just on demographics, I'd probably go into health and geriatrics.
Okay, Jay?
Good choice.
Thanks.
I would go to China. I'd spend a year in China, and I would be sure to come back here with all that I learned in China, and I'd look really carefully at aquaponics.
I would go with Chris. I would spend my money actually on cybersecurity, cyber infrastructure, and medicine.
Well, very good. Very good answers, and I really enjoyed this panel very much. We got a lot of questions. I apologize to our viewers that we didn't get to all of them, but I think we covered a great area of space here. Again, apology for Paul Brubaker not being with us, but I don't think we missed him too much. Now, next time on Insights, we're going to talk about what they're talking about in every county. Officials are talking trash, specifically what they're going to do with it. There are styrofoam and plastic bag bans, mandatory recycling laws, and a giant incinerator burning garbage into energy. Despite these efforts, our landfills are reaching capacity and nobody wants the next dump in their neighborhood. On the next Insights, how long will Hawaii landfill space last? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.